In 1956, a woman who had been convicted of war crimes in absentia, sentenced to life in prison, walked into a West German courtroom. She wasn't there to defend herself. She was there to sue the government for money. Her lawyers argued that denying benefits solely on moral grounds would undermine the law, and she won. From 1959 until her death in 1985, she collected pension checks funded by German taxpayers, while ignoring a Czechoslovak life sentence that hung over her head. But here's what most people don't know. This wasn't just a Nazi's widow living off her husband's crimes. She committed her own. Her name was Lina Heydrich, and she ran a slave labour operation, tortured prisoners personally, and called the Holocaust a fairy tale until the day she died. The true believer who found her perfect monster. Most people assume Lina Heydrich was radicalized by her husband, that she fell under the spell of Reinhard Heydrich, the man Hitler called the one with the iron heart. The truth is far more disturbing. She was already a committed Nazi before she ever met him. Lina von Osten was born June 14, 1911, on Fehmarn, a small island in the Baltic Sea off Germany's northern coast. Her family belonged to impoverished German aristocracy, clinging to titles without the wealth to support them. In 1929, at just 18 years old, she attended a Nazi rally where Adolf Hitler delivered a speech. She joined the party that same year, 2 full years before she would meet Reinhard Heydrich. This distinction matters. Lina wasn't a woman swept up by a charismatic husband. She was an ideologue who found a partner willing to act on their shared beliefs. A letter she wrote home in 1933 described SA and SS violence against political opponents as special pleasure. She wrote about revenge being finally permitted, not with horror, but with satisfaction. This was her worldview before marriage, before children, before the castle and the prisoners and the binoculars at the window. When Lina met a disgraced naval officer at a rowing club dance in December 1930, she didn't just fall for him. She pushed him toward the Nazi movement that would make him history's most efficient killer. The 2-week courtship that changed history. Reinhard Heydrich had just been discharged from the German Navy in disgrace. He'd broken off an engagement to another woman, a scandal that ended his military career and left him directionless. He was tall, blonde, with sharp features the Nazis would later hold up as the Aryan ideal. But in December 1930, he was simply a humiliated young man without prospects. Lina's family had SS connections, particularly through her relative Karl von Eberstein. After a courtship lasting just 2 weeks, they announced their engagement on December 18, 1930. They married on December 26, 1931, and Lina immediately began steering her new husband toward the organisation that would define both their lives. Under her influence, and through her family's contacts, Heydrich joined the SS. Heinrich Himmler interviewed him and immediately recognised what he called his intelligence and complete lack of moral restraint. Within months, Heydrich was building the SS intelligence service. Within years, he would become the architect of the Holocaust, the man who chaired the Wannsee Conference, where the systematic extermination of 11 million Jews was coordinated. But as Reinhard Heydrich rose through the Nazi hierarchy, Lina wasn't merely a beneficiary watching from the sidelines. She was building her own dark legacy, one that would remain hidden for decades. A gift for genocide. By 1941, Reinhard Heydrich had been appointed Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, effectively the Nazi ruler of occupied Czechoslovakia. The family moved into a 30-room estate at Panenské Břežany, 14 kilometers north of Prague. They lived in extraordinary luxury while Heydrich implemented a campaign of terror across the country. Within weeks of his arrival, thousands were arrested and hundreds executed. Then, on May 27, 1942, everything changed. Czech resistance fighters trained by British Special Operations ambushed Heydrich's car on a hairpin turn in Prague. A grenade exploded against the vehicle, driving shrapnel deep into his body. 8 days later, on June 4th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich was dead. The Nazi hierarchy's response to his death was twofold. First came the reprisals, the complete destruction of the village of Lidissa, where every man and boy over 15 was shot, the women sent to concentration camps, the children gassed. Then came the rewards for his widow. Lina received the castle, financial compensation, and something else entirely: a labour force. Most Nazi wives faded into obscurity after losing their husbands. Lina Heydrich did the opposite. She transformed her estate into what survivors would later describe as a miniature labour and concentration camp. And she wasn't just a passive overseer collecting profit from slave labour, she was an active torturer. 150 prisoners and one woman's cruelty. Starting in 1942, approximately 150 Jewish men from Theresienstadt ghetto were forced to work Lina Heydrich's estate. They cleared land, tended gardens, and expanded vegetable production. Produce she sold to Nazi troops stationed in Prague. The operation made her money. But profit wasn't her only interest. Lina stood at the castle's corner window with binoculars, watching the prisoners labour below. Any slowdown, any pause, any sign of insufficient effort triggered immediate complaints to the SS guards stationed on the property. She didn't simply report infractions, she participated in the punishment. Survivors described her spitting on prisoners who showed insufficient deference. She beat those whose pace or demeanour displeased her. She commanded SS men to whip labourers while she watched. The prisoners slept in converted stables, received minimal food, and existed solely to expand her business operations. The arrangement became so exploitative that Heinrich Himmler himself eventually had to pay her rent from his personal account. She had demanded compensation for the forced labour she received from Flossenburg concentration camp, 15 Jehovah's Witness prisoners, and refused to back down until Himmler covered the cost. Even the SS chief found her demands excessive, but it was a tragedy in October 1943 that would reveal the true depth of Lina Heydrich's ideology, a moment when most people's humanity might surface, and hers was nowhere to be found. The grave that revealed everything. October 24th, 1943. Klaus Heydrich, 10 years old, is struck by a truck near the estate. A Jewish doctor from the labour squad rushes to help the boy. He performs first aid, does everything within his power. The child dies anyway. What happens next tells you everything you need to know about Lina Heydrich. First, she demands the truck driver be executed. An investigation clears him of wrongdoing. The accident was exactly that, an accident. Lina is unsatisfied, but moves on to her next concern. She orders Jewish prisoners to dig her son's grave on the estate grounds. They begin the work. Then she changes her mind. The grave must be redug by German soldiers. An Aryan child cannot rest in earth touched by Jewish hands, even hands that had just tried to save his life. The doctor who rushed to help her dying son, who did everything possible to keep him alive, was still fundamentally unclean in her eyes. His effort meant nothing against his identity. This is who Lina Heydrich was, a mother who, in the moment of her greatest grief, thought first about racial purity, not gratitude for the doctor's attempt, not shared humanity in the face of loss, just ideology, cold and absolute, even as she buried her child. The escape that should have been impossible. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The world begins reckoning with Nazi crimes. Allied forces liberate concentration camps, and the full horror of what happened becomes undeniable. War crimes trials are announced. Lina Heydrich flees to Fehmarn Island, the same tiny island where she was born 34 years earlier. She knows what's coming. Czechoslovakia convicts her in absentia in 1948, documenting her direct abuse, enslavement, and exploitation of forced labourers at the Panenské Břežiny estate. The sentence: life imprisonment. She never served a single day. The British occupation forces controlling Fehmarn refused the extradition request. Cold War politics had already begun trumping post-war justice. Czechoslovakia was falling under Soviet influence, and Western powers were increasingly reluctant to cooperate with Eastern European governments, even to deliver convicted war criminals. But the real farce was yet to come. West German denazification proceedings classified Lina Heydrich as a Mitläuferin, a mere follower, the lowest category of guilt reserved for Germans who had simply gone along with the regime without active participation. Her punishment for running a slave labour operation, for personally torturing prisoners, for standing at her window with binoculars watching for anyone who slowed down so she could have them whipped. A 75 Deutsche Mark fine. That's it. The woman who spat on starving prisoners was legally categorised alongside office clerks who had joined the party to keep their jobs. And this classification didn't just set her free, it positioned her to exploit the system even further, making Germany pay for her husband's service. In 1956, Lina Heydrich sued the West German government for a widow's pension. Her legal argument was almost elegant in its cynicism. Denying benefits solely on moral grounds would undermine the fundamental principles of welfare law. The state couldn't discriminate based on what her husband had done. She was entitled to support like any other widow. The political landscape made her victory possible. The conservative CDU, the liberal FDP, and the nationalist DP had blocked legislative clauses that would have excluded Nazi war criminals' families from state benefits. They argued such exclusions were legally problematic, practically unworkable, or simply unnecessary. The courts had no choice but to apply the law as written. In 1959, the court ruled in Lina Heydrich's favour. From that year until her death in 1985, she received government pension payments funded by German taxpayers, while under a life sentence from Czechoslovakia that she simply ignored. She had been convicted of enslaving and torturing prisoners. She collected checks anyway. Her case became a blueprint for hundreds of other Nazi officials' families who used the same legal strategy to claim state benefits. The widow of the man who planned the Holocaust was being paid by the country he helped destroy. And she wasn't finished building her post-war life. The guest house where SS men remembered the good old days. On Fehmarn, Lina operated a guest house called Burgfriede. It became an informal gathering place for former SS officers, men who reminisced about what they called the good old days. She helped wanted Nazi fugitives navigate post-war Germany, providing contacts and advice for those trying to avoid justice. In 1965, she married Finnish theatre director Mauno Manninen. The marriage had nothing to do with love. She wanted to change her surname from Heydrich to Manninen to escape the notoriety that followed her most famous name. They divorced 4 years later. She kept the name. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, American biographer Nancy Dougherty conducted extensive interviews with Lina for a book project. What emerged from those conversations was a portrait of absolute denial. Lina insisted that Reinhard had only thought of a territorial solution for Jews, never mass murder. This despite the fact that her husband personally chaired the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the systematic extermination of 11 million Jews was explicitly coordinated. He didn't just attend, he ran the meeting. When confronted with documentary evidence, the Wannsee Protocol, survivor testimony, the records of the death camps, Lina dismissed it all. The Holocaust, she declared, was all a fairy tale. In 1979, 6 years before her death, she stated publicly that the technical annihilation of the Jews was not at all possible. Her final recorded statement on her ideology was simple and chilling. National Socialism was a faith and I can never renounce it. The questions that remain. Lina Heydrich died August 14, 1985, at 74 years old, on Fehmarn, the island where she was born. She never faced justice. She never expressed remorse. She never acknowledged that anything wrong had happened at all. A servant named Helena Vovsova had secretly brought food to starving Jewish prisoners at the estate during the war, risking execution if discovered. Her small acts of humanity happened in the shadow of Lina's cruelty. Nearly all of those prisoners were eventually deported to Auschwitz after Lina's workforce was no longer needed. Most did not survive. Meanwhile, the woman who tortured them lived freely for 40 years. She collected pension checks. She ran a guest house. She gave interviews denying the Holocaust. She changed her name to escape her past while defending that past in every conversation. The question her story forces us to ask isn't just about her individual guilt. It's about the systems that protected her, the occupation authorities who refused extradition, the denazification boards that classified a torturer as a mere follower, the courts that granted pensions to war criminals' families, the political parties that blocked legislation designed to prevent exactly this outcome. How many others escaped the same way? How many perpetrators lived out comfortable lives while their victims' families received nothing? These aren't historical questions. They're questions about what justice means and what happens when societies decide that moving forward matters more than accountability. Lina Heydrich answered those questions with her life. She bet that the world would let her get away with it. And she was right. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, check out one of the videos on screen now. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Hangover.